Shall we? Yeah, proceed. So we're now in public session. So this afternoon there's a briefing in relation to the provisions of the general scheme of the miscellaneous provisions withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union on the 29th of March 2019, Bill 2019. So I'd like to welcome the Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment, Mr Richard Bruton, TD, here today to brief the committee on the provisions of the Brexit Bill insofar as they relate to the remit of his department. I'd also like to welcome your officials who are with you here this afternoon. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against any person outside of the Houses or an official, either by name or in such ways to make him or her identifiable. And I would just remind witnesses and members to turn off your mobile phones or to switch them onto flight mode. Minister, you might want to make your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hildegarde. I did circulate a note, so I won't go into it in exhaustively, but I suppose just the background to this, obviously the Department has been considering the contingency for all of our various sources of energy in the context of a hard Brexit, and we've looked at oil, gas, coal, electricity. In respect of oil, gas and coal, we are very content that the system, having been carefully examined by the regulators and the various overseers, that they will operate normally and without fear of any significant disruption. In the case of gas, as you know, it comes predominantly from Scotland, and it is on what they call Prisma software, which will continue to operate post-Brexit. At the moment, there are no tariffs imposed by the EU on gas imports, and that would continue to be the case. So, having done a detailed analysis by GNI and CRU, they're happy that the gas there will be no change in cross-border trade in the event of a no deal. The situation in relation to electricity is more complicated, as you know that in 2007 a single electricity market was established, and that is regulated under a single electricity market committee that has the regulators north and south, an independent and deputy independent member. So they manage that platform. It's managed within European law, and it makes it different from, if you like, the gas market, which is operated on an independent software platform. So there will be some impact on the sort of trading that can occur as a result of a departure of the US or of the UK from the European Union. Specifically, certain types of trade won't be able to continue to happen. There will still be security of supply trades and what they call intraday trades, and it is believed that they will continue to support the vast majority of the flow of activity on it. However, it won't be, strictly speaking, compliant with European law. And what will need to be done if that continues into the medium term is we will have to negotiate and set out a new basis for continuing to trade of the single electricity market. It is the desire of all countries involved, the UK, the European Union and ourselves, that the single electricity market continue. It has brought great benefits north and south. It's the only example of a fully integrated EU electricity market with a common trading platform. And the UK have signalled very clearly that it is their intention to ensure, and they have published legislation that will ensure, insofar as possible, that they will be compliant with the requirements of EU law, but nonetheless it would take, it will have to, over time, a medium-term platform will have to be put in place. What we're doing in this legislation is we're taking powers which we don't believe will need to be used, but they are being taken in the event that there was a very severe disruption and it led to some unexpected market activity. what we're doing here is giving the CRU, the regulator, the power to alter licences in the event of certain things happening. So it's clearly something that is a precautionary move rather than something we believe will be necessary to use. But when the full evaluation was done by the CRU and Airgrid and so on, it was believed that this would be a prudent piece of legislation. So the provision to alter licences will be considerably constrained in that it will have to have a ministerial approval to say it's justified. It can only last for 1 year. It can only be exercised in the context of a disorderly Brexit, and its commencement would be contingent on an absolute necessity being established. So the legislation which will be published, is it Thursday or Friday? Friday. Will set out the provisions in a number of sections, but those are the main provisions of it, and it is, I suppose, to make assurance doubly sure that the CRU would have this reserve power should there be activity in the market that isn't now anticipated. But that's the position as I understand it. And there's people with me here who are experts in this market, both its legal dimensions as well as its practical day-to-day dimensions. So hopefully we're in a position to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Minister. Am I bringing Deputy Stanley and then Deputy Dooley?
Thanks, Minister, for outlining that. I suppose the big concern is interruptions to supply is one issue, and the other is the cost. And if I heard you correctly, you said that you feel that with the gas there will be no impact, little or no impact in relation to Brexit. I have a couple of questions around it, and obviously with the single electricity market, which correctly, and we agree with you that that has brought a lot of benefits. The fact that we have that operating on the island as a whole, and probably it's beneficial, very beneficial for the North, who at this stage really don't have. It's questionable whether to have enough power generated within the 6 counties to supply themselves. So obviously they're very dependent on this. But just in relation to Brexit, we have the 4th highest electricity prices. We have above average for gas. Will these go up now? And just a couple of things I wanted to just tease out with you. One is in relation to that. Even in the event that there is, there isn't, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, right, there will be WTO tariffs on gas. That's my understanding. So will it mean, could you clarify that, and will it mean energy prices going up in, a month's time or 6 weeks or 7 weeks' time following Brexit? There's a point that, and I've raised before you, which in the chamber, just in relation to the regulator, the companies that are operating the utilities here, I think it's accepted that they're profitable and that's the business they're in. That's fair enough, but they have substantial margins, and the regulator does have access to those retail margins. The retailer has also said that the margins are higher than they are in other European countries. And I'm just wondering, that particularly in the context of Brexit, that needs to be monitored. Is the intention of the department and yourself, Minister, to have a review or investigation of that done to watch this? Because, householders and businesses, there was another energy price increase there just recently. There was a wave of them last August when the weather was very hot and people weren't thinking much about heat and power and light. But there was a wave of energy increases right across the board, householders to businesses and to everyone. And the last question I have is just in relation to the bill is about about changes to the single electricity market. And I think it's right, that we are preparing from a legislative point of view for Brexit, because it's very. As of today, you could toss a coin as to what way it's going to fall. In terms of will there be a crash or will there be will there be a deal? And it's looking more like that. It could be a crash, that the EU, that Britain could crash out of the EU. But I'm just wondering that, the new market changes under the ISEM that came in last October, that was meant to save householders and businesses 200 million. That's what was reported at the time. What will happen with those savings? So I suppose to sum up, it's the questions around, with WTO tariffs on gas, what's the implications there? Will gas go up? In relation to, the escalating prices of energy generally, and particularly in the context of Brexit, the regulator, and we've raised this before, we have a genuine concern, and I have a genuine concern around the retail margins, because it has been reported that the profit margins are higher than in other countries. And is it planned to do a review of that or investigation of that, and ongoing monitoring, particularly as we move into the Brexit stage? And just in relation to that 200 million savings that we were supposed to have last October.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, if you want to come in on that, I might go to other members after.
I'll come in on that. Just firstly, while there is such a thing as a WTO tariff, the EU does not apply it. So the EU has zero tariffs on gas imports. So the price of gas will not be affected. And the same is true of electricity. So there is no tariff being applied to electricity. The issue of controlling the price, this is essentially a market system. So the price is a sort of a supply and demand under the oversight of regulators. Now, clearly, if the market needs certain things, if you're trying to bring in renewables onto the grid and you need short, rapid call-up capacity, part of it, they can make arrangements for such capacity payments to be made within the marketplace. So it is a regulated market where the regulators set the requirements in the public interest, but after that it trades on a day-to-day basis as a market to clear. And that's the way it works. In terms of those decisions, they're entirely independent by the regulator. I, as Minister, don't have any role in asking them to review. If there was an issue of alleged collusion that people thought was occurring outside of that the regulator wasn't overseeing, the Competition Authority would be the point of call in terms of price issues. But essentially this is a regulated market with the regulators north and south directly involved in managing the market. The reason why I suppose it may be more expensive than others is we are a small market, we have limited interconnection with the wider European market. But notwithstanding that, we've been very successful in integrating renewables into it. So we are regarded as something of a best practice model of how a small grid can integrate renewables into it to a high level, and our ambition is to build that much further. So I think those are the
SEM last October, when that, there was a commitment there, as I recall it, around savings of 200 million overall to customers. In the context, that doesn't appear to have happened. I mean, what we have since is further cost increases, and in the context of Brexit, like the real fear, and I go back to this, is the real fear is particularly with gas interruption in supply, with electricity, the actual cost to householders and the cost to businesses, it's very, very high. And you'll appreciate that in the context of other increasing costs around insurance and costs that small businesses are facing. This is presenting real challenges.
Yeah, the position is that the CRU has examined margins, and they are happy that the market is competitive, and there's 2 reports published on that. So we can provide you with those reports. The other thing that is worth saying is that it's a wholesale market, and there is a volatility with world prices. Like obviously, world fuel prices will impact on it. The 200 million savings capacity, they're due.
They're separate to the increases are due to the wholesale.
Oh yeah. No, the savings in capacity was based on having the interconnection, so you don't have to have two small two small grids would have to have more standby capacity. So you save money by integrating the grids, but the price increases are due to wholesale price increases of fuels. So they're not related. But if the deputy has concerned about the margins, the CRU, who is independent in this, they've done reports, so they are satisfied. Now, of course, I can understand if people are comparing prices here to somewhere else, there will be a difference, but it's not, in the view of the CRU, it's not due to excessive profit taking.
A little bit of clarification on what Deputy Stanley said. So that there's no tariff applied for the trade in electricity between the two jurisdictions, what will now be effectively a third country in the event of or when Brexit takes place. So that's just a straight linear exercise, market driven, and capacity and requirement, I suppose. And the same applies to gas, regardless of its origins. Its access to the country is tariff free. So there's really no concerns there. So your only concerns is the potential for this legislation is based on concerns that there may be some capacity for actors or players to distort the market in some way, which I don't seem to get if there isn't such a tariff-related requirement. But anyway, in any event, the regulator we're giving more powers to the regulator to forearm the regulator in that event. But I suppose in light of the fact that Britain is exiting the European Union, is the government still of a mind to try and further advance the Celtic interconnector so that we're connected to the European grid and obviously the advantages that exercise there? My understanding was that our interconnectedness, particularly on the electricity grid, was more to the benefit of our friends north of the border in the 6 counties than any great benefit that the south would accrue, or would accrue to the south. So, I mean, and that was important, and of course it's right that we would assist there. So, just in terms of our long-term vulnerability from a requirement to get access to the wider European grid, we do need, I would have thought, to advance that, the Celtic interconnector, particularly in light of our climate change requirements, which clearly, if it works to the extent that more of our transport fleet is electrified, more of our heating requirement is electrified, with the greater requirement around the storage of data, we are going to be using significantly more electricity. So we do need to be more resilient there. And obviously there's a wider debate about renewables, both on and offshore wind, etc. But notwithstanding that, I would have thought that the Celtic interconnector was a major requirement that now comes into sharper focus as a result of Brexit.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are very clear that we do want to pursue the Celtic interconnector because, as you say, an interconnector with a non-member state isn't as beneficial, even though it's an important connection and something we would continue to value. But an interconnector to Europe would be very important for us. You asked, you said, expressing some wonder, could disruption or could market manipulation occur in this event? I think you're probably right. It's unlikely. It's a fairly competitive market, but I suppose, to be assured that no manipulation of a market could occur in the event of a disorderly Brexit, we have been advised that it's prudent to give this power to the CRU so they could manage the way different players operate within the market, should it need to be. While you're right to say the North, we supply the North, that's not to say having the interconnector doesn't have mutual benefits, because we do, it obviously permits both sides to have less standby capacity and makes it easier to take on board renewables. So it has benefits for everyone, even though, if you like, we are the net exporters in the present situation. I think that's the position.
Next.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd like to, of course, acknowledge and welcome the Minister. I think this was always going to be the great imponderable, how we're going to work with single electricity market in the case of Brexit or even a hard Brexit, and these issues are something that is very, very welcome that we're teasing out The Minister might elaborate, and he did mention that there was no issue regarding gas in particular, oil in particular, that we had enough supply of oil. Could I ask about, in particular, just the Whitty Island complex itself? Is it at capacity? Is it at full capacity in light of Brexit? And where exactly is the actual capacity of that terminal itself, take into consideration the unique standing it has in the state regarding fuel security and particularly oil security? It's just something that it's been questioned down south to know, is that full capacity in relation to the actual hard Brexit, if it was to come to that? Regarding the actual market itself and the volatility that could emerge, and I think it's important that this is a piece of legislation is going to try and ensure there isn't volatility. How far, or is there any negotiations at any UK level regarding how we're going to come to this agreement, or could the Minister elaborate on the mid-term view and how this agreement is going to come? Is it actually going to become a bilateral, or how do you think these negotiations are going to come? Will they come through the European Union? Where and what will be the actors, and where and what will the actual negotiations of this actual debate happen? Because a bilateral at this level, is that the approach, or how do you believe it's going to happen itself? Regarding the actual pricing and the pricing structures, there would be a fear that a hard Brexit would increase prices to some degree. I think this piece of legislation does give power, in particular to the CRU regarding that. Would you be concerned that you could have a price increase, or you believe that this piece of legislation will have the ability to actually strengthen the hand of the CRU to ensure that the market won't have that volatility factor? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, first, I'll have to get you information on the Whitty status. I mean, we do have 98-day cover for our oil supplies. Now, some of them are 60 days, I think, is in the Republic. Some further days are in Northern Ireland, and some further days are in the UK, and some further days are in Europe. That diversity is believed to give some. It's not having it all here is not necessarily a bad thing, but we are content that we have adequate cover. The oil markets are pretty open and accessible, and while we do source a lot of supply currently from the UK, there are alternative sources accessible in Europe for should we need to divert our source of supply. There isn't tariff supply to oil either. In terms of the longer term arrangements for the single electricity market, I understand that there are recognised third country platforms that the EU recognises where countries trade on an electricity platform, and the move would be to get that recognised as such. Obviously, there would be some differences in that we know the UK is not recognising, even if they had similar law to the European Union, it's not necessarily judiciable in the European courts. So there would be some differences. So there would be issues to be worked out, I think, in establishing that. But I think there is a strong belief by all the players that this is what they want to do. The UK has signalled its intention to be compatible with with the single electricity market, to continue to operate. So I think there is an expectation that this is something that could be worked through.
Deputy Ryan.
Indeed. I support the Minister in the measures that are due to go into piece of legislation, but just the opportunity to ask two questions. Firstly, and I know this is complex legally, but he mentions there the trading north and south and the benefits we all get from that. Can you give any update on where we are with the north-south interconnector? I mean, it's, God help us, been planned for 15, 20 years now, stuck in our planning system, and now stuck in the political system in the north. I understand the absence of assembly and the absence of ministers may threaten its urgent delivery, because it is, in my mind, urgent. Is it true that they're in danger of blackouts up there? Is it true that it's costing us 30 million a year? And where does the Minister think that will go in terms of overcoming the judgment, as I understand, the Belfast High Court, I think it was last week, which may force it to go back to planning? Or I'm not certain what mechanism. I don't know if the Minister has any note or update on that. Would be appreciated. The second broader question, just in terms of the UK, I was just checking again there because I was asking Mr. Manley there about the UK wholesale prices. My recollection was that they were 50% above the Northwest European average wholesale electricity price. And sure enough, I went to check again, and the latest figures, it does show at about 75 cent, European cent, if you translate from sterling, and the EU wholesale price is roughly 50 cent, actually below that, but let's say round it up. So it's an electricity market that's consistently now for a number of years has been 50% higher, more expensive than its neighbours. And the real risk for us is, in the medium-long term, that we get tied into a UK regional electricity market because we're just such close neighbours and there's this interconnection and cross-dependence because of the price of gas influencing what our electricity price is. I don't know, have you had any dialogue with your counterparts in London, be it Greg Clark or whichever minister is the key person now, as to what their policy is, strategy, post-Brexit, whatever Brexit is? Because if they keep going on an isolated basis, their electricity prices are going to continue to be 50% higher than their continental competitors. That would see a mass migration over time of the digital services industry, who would be very sensitive to electricity prices. I don't know whether you've got any indication from their ministers or from their administrative system as to whether they will look to continue membership, for example, the North Sea Offshores Grid Initiative, which would see much further interconnection, not just between us and the UK, but also between the UK and Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, France. They only have 5%, 4% I think interconnection at the moment. They should be bringing that, if they were abiding by European rules, up to 15%. But even aside from that, if they want to bring their wholesale price down, they must be looking at massive levels of interconnection, because building yet more Hinkley points is only going to make their system more expensive. So just the general question is, do you have any sense from them in the negotiations or in any discussions as to what their long-term or medium-term objectives is in the electricity market? Because if they go isolated, there's a risk that we are connected to them as an isolated system, and that we inherit then or import those high electricity prices, which put us at a disadvantage to our continental cousins. Is that something you're looking at in a kind of a medium-term strategic issue for the state?
Thank you. I know, Senator Ryan, you wanted to talk briefly about one particular issue, was it?
Yeah, well, it's a similar, but yeah. So can I raise it now?
Yes, thank you.
Can I? Welcome, Minister, and can I ask you, in a post-Brexit scenario, without an agreement, where a crash out, as the colloquial word for it is, could you tell me what you think, Minister, in that scenario, are the implications for the North-South interconnector? And what are the implications for it, particularly in the light of the rejection of planning north of the border? How would that impact on the post-Brexit situation? Without an agreement, where would all stand?
Sorry,
Sorry.
he didn't catch what you said there, Senator.
Sorry, will I start again?
No, the rejection of
The rejection of planning north of the border.
planning for the interconnector.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sorry. The rejection of yes, sorry. I take the rejection of planning north of the border. So what are the implications in Brexit crash, in a crash out Brexit? How do you see that impacting on the North-South interconnector? How do you see the rejection of planning impacting? Would a new agreement have to arise between North and South? Would a new agreement have to follow a crash out? Surely we'd be back. Wouldn't we be back to the drawing board? And lastly, can I ask you, assuming an agreed withdrawal from Brexit, how again would you see the implications of that for the North-South interconnector? And I suppose, to go back, it's a very relevant question, because business is very tight, and the Brexit has a huge consequences for the part of Ireland that I live in, and where all my family and the area I represent and work in all the time. It has enormous implications there. And given that one of the implications would be the margins will be tightened on so many fronts, if energy prices rose any bit at all, any little bit at all, it could put a number of firms out of business. And could you comment on that? I don't think they could withstand energy increases, price increases.
So thank you. Just in case you're not aware.
Yeah, so thank you. That's it, Minister.
Thank you. And if you need to leave, we'll record the Minister's response will be on the record.
Maybe I'll start with Joe Raleigh, Senator Joe Raleigh. First of all, if there's an agreed withdrawal, the North-South single market is recognised in the withdrawal agreement, and its continuing maintenance is actually recognised in the withdrawal agreement. So there is a very strong commitment by everyone concerned to see that continue. In the event of a crash out, as I said, there are certain trades that now occur on the single electricity market that no longer will occur. However, the expectation is that the remaining trades, the security supply trades and the intraday trades, will continue to support pretty normal business on the system, and that it won't lead to any short-term problems. The CRU, as I said, is taking this power that we hope to enact to give it additional capacity to alter licences to ensure that the market is protected. So I think that's the position. In terms of what would happen about a new agreement, in the longer term, as I say, that would have to be worked out on the same way as there are agreements elsewhere. Finland and Norway and Switzerland have, third-party recognised grid interconnection and market operations. So there are precedents for integration of markets that are recognised by the European Union, and that's what would have to be worked out. And we obviously have been engaged in discussions at EU level regarding that. In terms of the point both Joe Raleigh and Eamon Ryan made about the North-South interconnector, the position, as I understand it, is our Supreme Court cleared the project in the South this morning, but as Eamon Ryan has said, Deputy Eamon Ryan has said, in Northern Ireland last week, the state withdrew the application in light of the fact that there is this flaw in not having a ministerial presence. However, they have introduced new legislation which allows the Secretary-General to provide the necessary approvals, and it would appear that they are now considering, I don't know the details of this, they're considering starting the process again. I don't know at what point.
The ministerial consent process?
I know. I think it's more than that. It's going back into, but I can't be categorical as to say what the planning, the next steps in the planning process will be. I don't know. It was only last Friday week that they signalled to the court that they were withdrawing in view of the frailty. I think on another project. It was.
Sorry, just asking for this. Is it true, as I recall, that they risk blackouts in 2021? Is it on the Coolkira shutdown, I presume, or other?
Again, I don't want to be categorical and talk, but my understanding is that they do have standby plants that they can bring into operation. Now, they may not be the ideal plants. I think they're coal-fired plants. Yeah, and they're not the ideal, but they do have plants that they can bring back into play that were fingered, I suppose, for decommissioning. So I don't think blackouts is the issue, and obviously the continuing operation of the single market, which I think everyone is determined to continue to operate, will deal with that. I don't again want to be categorical about what the UK strategy is, but insofar as I can tell, I think they recognise the importance of being interconnected to the European Union market, and they see that as one of the benefits that they want to continue, and they have signalled their intention in their own the material that they published, statutory instruments on electricity cross-border trading matters, they signalled their desire to maintain interconnection and engaging in European markets. So it does seem this is an area where they want to continue to see benefits of interconnection.
If I can share this as a supplementary, in that regard, taking, for example, our current existing east-west interconnector, or indeed the Moyle, well, no, take our one from North Dublin to North Wales. If there is a dispute on the operation of that, have they accepted that the ECJ would be the final arbiter in terms of the European legal system, or indeed with regard to their ongoing presence in a developing northwest regional European electricity market? Are they willing to, do you have any sense whether they would accept the ECJ in regard to its having some final arbitration in its operation?
I think as far as they've gone is they've sought to replicate the legislative arrangements, but it wouldn't be adjudicated on by the European courts.
Talking to German and other authorities is that they would insist on anyone being in a regional electricity market having to accept the final jurisdiction of the ECJ. Is that your similar understanding? Or?
Well, that's not my understanding in the case of, you know, Russia and Finland and Norway and Switzerland, that I don't know whether they all accept, like Norway and Switzerland probably do, but I doubt if Russia accepts the rulings of the EC.
Another difference between what the relationships they have with
Russia
and Switzerland even.
But I think, you know, that is, I suppose, I don't want to speculate on what final arrangements might emerge. It is an area where there aren't tariffs in operation, there aren't regulatory obstacles. So, but this obviously will be an issue as to how a new platform can be finally worked out. But I think there is a desire in Europe, as in the UK, as in here, to ensure that, you know, we can continue to operate the North-South interconnector or the North-South single electricity market. Their wider relationship to Europe is an issue that is somewhat separate, I'd say, in that, you know, there hasn't been, it's not in the withdrawal agreement, for example, that continuing operation of all interconnection would be an objective or a desired objective. So I don't want to be speculating in an area that we just can't predict.
No, I mean, but at the same time, I think we should be honest. And mind, I think the withdrawal agreement, as I recall, has very little real detail on the energy side. In effect, it's part of a future arrangement. But I think we should be honest in terms of anything I've heard in Brussels or in Berlin or elsewhere is an absolute point-blank insistence that if you're in the single electricity market, you play by the rules, the final arbiter of the rules is the ECJ. We'd be better upfront and honest about that at the start. Maybe there is some legal hook that the European Union will allow them to get the benefit from that. The risk for us, if we're not honest and straight about it, is, as I said, we would end up in the end in being an isolated UK and Irish electricity market, which would be 50% more expensive than our continental equivalent, and which would dramatically affect our digital industries, our medical device industries, or every other industry, and indeed our consumers. And so I think we're better to keep them in the market, and we're better to be honest about what that entails.
I think you're leaping a bit forward. To say that we want to protect the single electricity market north-south does not mean we don't want to, as Deputy Timmy Dooley was saying, that we don't want to pursue rapidly with a Celtic interconnector. And indeed, we will be making application jointly with France later this year for EU support for that. So they're not maintaining the benefits of the single electricity market on the island of Ireland isn't mutually exclusive from developing full integration into a wider European market. So I don't, you know, I think while of course Britain's withdrawal is changing the situation on the east-west. I think we are aware, we're alert to the point you make, that we want to maximise the benefits of European Union membership while not undermining the obvious benefits of being on a single island and having an interconnected electricity system that has already conferred significant benefits.
I
Very final point.
I would thrill to see the French interconnector, but I recognise that that on its own is not going to be the full extent of the interconnection we're going to need. We're going to need probably several other interconnectors, with the UK especially. There is another interconnector already being planned from near Wexford, isn't it, across to the Welsh coast, which is imminent, as I understand. So I just think this is not an insignificant issue, and I think we should be honest and clear as to what our strategic intent is. I think that should be the development of a North West European electricity regional market. I think it's vital that the UK is in that, and I think we should be upfront with them what the actual rules of that are, so that we don't end up with a really fractured system in 5 or 10 years' time. It is thinking 5 or 10 years, but that's what you have to think in this area.
Deputy, and final word to the Minister before we finish up, if you want to.
I've no further comment on that. Just to thank deputies and senators for the opportunity to explain this. I think, as I say, it is a reserve power that we are seeking to take in this legislation, something we hope won't have to be used.
Thank you, Minister, and your officials for coming before us this afternoon for this briefing. So our committee, the Joint Committee, stands adjourned until 4 p.m. on the 5th of March 2019. Thank you very much.